Congressman Rush Holt's father, I don't know how many of you know this by way of history, his father, Rush Holt Sr., was the youngest United States Senator in the history of this country. At the age of 29, he became a U.S. Senator from the state of West Virginia. And he was a Democrat. Because West Virginia is...
He was actually both, but that's a long
He was. Because West Virginia today is... Unfortunately, he served, by the way, 1935 to 1941 in the United States Senate. And unfortunately, he passed away at a very young age. In fact, our congressman here today was only, I believe, 6 years old when his father passed away from cancer. Congressman Rush Holt has completed his bachelor's degree, a master's, and went on to get a master's and PhD at NYU in physics. He went on to become a faculty member at Swarthmore College from 1980 to 1988. 1989, for about 9 years, he became the assistant director of Princeton Plasma Physics Lab at Princeton University. He is published in several scientific journals, and he has also filed a patent in this field. He was elected to Congress in 1998 and has since been re-elected 5 times. I thought for a minute that was an act of God. He is now, I believe, the only research physicist in Congress. Is that correct? There were 2 when you first got in. But one lost his job in 2010, the other one, I believe, retired. So he's the only research physicist in Congress today. Here's an interesting fact. Congressman Rush Holt and John McCain, do you know what they have in common? They both appeared on Jeopardy. Am I making it up?
I didn't know that.
True. But something else about Jeopardy. Congressman Rush Holt in 2011, and this was not televised, but I believe you can find it on YouTube, he actually competed against the IBM supercomputer Watson on Jeopardy, off camera. And he beat the supercomputer. That's one hell of an achievement, because I watch Jeopardy. I'm not home to watch it. I certainly DVR it and watch it later. And very rarely do I beat even many of the contestants. So to beat Watson is one hell of an achievement. He got $8,600 and Watson got only $6,000. So he beat him handily. Rush Holt was the first Democrat to hold the district seat that he now holds in 2 decades. And at the time he won, he was my congressman. Many of you remember that in 2000, in the year 2000, he ran against Dick Zimmer. That was the second time he ran for office. And you might remember it because it was a very close race, and I think it went 3 or 4 days after the election.
Another month.
Another month before you finally announced that you won. And I don't know if Dick Zimmer ever conceded, publicly anyway. But I believe Rush Holt won by 481 votes, was it? Something along those lines. Today his district covers an entirely different area. His district has moved south towards Mercer County and part of most of Middlesex County. And with gerrymandering and all the stuff that goes on in politics, which I've never really understood very well, his territory now does one of these, and I think ends somewhere just shy of the border of the state of Michigan. He is pro-choice, supports a public health care option, and he opposes privatization of Social Security. Congressman Holt has fought for tax credits for small businesses, increasing access to college education for middle-class families, maintaining Medicare and Social Security, and preserving the environment. By the way, preserving the environment is one of his strongest causes. He has sponsored several bills in Congress in all of these areas. In 2009, the National Journal rated him as one of the 8 most liberal members of the House. Today, he sits on 2 committees, correct me if I'm wrong, Committee on Education and Labor, and on the Committee on Natural Resources. He is also a member of at least 8 caucuses in the Congress. This man is a very busy man. a very highly educated man, an intelligent man, a very caring man, and one that all of us in New Jersey, I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, or Tea Party member, we should all be very proud of. Please welcome Congressman Dr. Rush Holt.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you very much for that full and actually well-researched introduction. I appreciate that. I am eager to get to know the folks in this area, and so I particularly appreciate the full introduction. I represent now 730,000 people across central New Jersey, and have the honor of representing people in 44 towns. That is changing, and there are new districts based on the new population figures from this state, and the 12th district that until now has gone from sea to shining river will go from roughly Trenton to Scotch Plains, a fairly north-south run. And there are 200,000 new people in that district. And so I hope to continue as representative of the 12th district, and that means I need to, I want to, I intend to get to know 200,000 new people. And so I'm delighted to be here with some new people and a number of longtime friends. There are no old friends in this room, just longtime friends. I, some years back, left a career in science research and teaching for the least respected profession in America. I was, at that time, very familiar with the American tradition of ridiculing members of Congress. We have had, of course, a healthy skepticism in this country toward government, and members of Congress have been the butt of jokes for as long as we have had the House of Representatives. You know, the congressman's favorite color is plaid, and the representative has to understand both sides of the question so that he can get around it. And on and on. The congressman who was who went into a bar and said, you know, I mean, the townsperson who went into the bar and said, the congressman here is a horse's ass. And the bartender told the bouncer to throw him out. And he came back in and he said, this is a free country, I can say that if I want. And the bartender said, yes, but you don't understand. Around here, this is horse country. Well, I take the job very seriously, and the job title and job description is representative. If you call our office, if you call my office, we answer the phone, Representative Rush Holt. It's not only better English usage, it really is the title and the job description. It's a remarkable invention, this American constitutional system of government. When I meet with students, I often ask them, what's the greatest invention of humans? And they, knowing that I'm a scientist, will usually come up with some technological answer. And I counter that I would argue that this system of government is the greatest invention of humans. With 308 or 10 million different ideas of how we should be spending our time and our money, to be able to balance those interests with a system that has lasted for 200 years through good times and bad, with a one of the world's most diverse populations is really an achievement. It's an honor to take part in that grand experiment that began in Philadelphia now more than 2 centuries ago. I'd like to talk about 2 things today. One for a few minutes about the job, how I view the job of representative. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the one particular matter of our competitiveness, our economic competitiveness as a nation. It's my job to, as I said at the very beginning, get to know the people of the district. I mean, the reason this ingenious idea, this country conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are equal, has worked, has lasted so long, is because the founders set up a system that really requires that day in and day out, regularly, we compare our ideals against the actual life of Americans, to see whether our vision of equality and equality of opportunity and liberty are really being played out in fact. Whether access to education and access to health care and access to clean air and clean water, access to satisfying jobs, civil rights, really match that conception, that proposition, those ideals. And so to be a representative, one needs to hear from the people. Over the past year, I've responded to 40,000 communications, actually responded to. This would be letters, emails, faxes, phone calls. Some people ask me, which way should I contact you? They're all about equally good. And I consider what the constituents say and reply. That's my signature at the bottom of the page. I always like to do it in hard copy when possible, to make sure people understand that this is a solid response, that I've really considered it. It's my way of trying to understand whether the American dream still belongs to all of us. That really is, in one sense, the issue of the day. I've, over the last year, Sarah Stewart here, my New Jersey director, went through my schedule just to sort of tally up my outreach to the constituents, and came up with 63 kind of major outreach events. A workshop for families on college student aid, a workshop for business people on taxes, an environmental roundtable, a meeting put together by the National Endowment for the Humanities, citizenship ceremonies for new citizens, 16 town hall meetings, 7 telephone town halls where we call out to thousands of people and invite them to join in a conference call discussion, 50 school visits, elementary, high school, college, sidewalk, office hours, and so on and so on. It is, I think, a necessary part of this job for me to hear from people if I'm going to have a good sense of how things are working. I certainly learn more that way than I do from, say, oversight hearings inside the Beltway in Congress. Those are useful. Economic tracts that are looking at the factors of our economy, those are useful. But there's nothing that takes the place of first-hand testimony from the constituents. And that's what we need. That's what I live on in my work. And I'm finding some good news and some troubling news. And the troubling news is related to this idea of the American dream. People feel it's slipping. It is now true in this district as well as over most of the country that there is a majority who question whether the quality of life for their children will be as good as it has been for them. First time in American history that we have not been optimistic about the future. And so I draw from that a need to invest in the future. Now you can get into some policy debates, and from what I'm going to say in a few minutes, well, we may have some. But I would argue that we should be more future-oriented. For example, the presidential debate should not be something that is scored on the basis of that night's contest, that night's appearance. Rather, it should be something that each individual looks at in the context of where we want this country to go in the future, where we want to be in the future, not just who appeals at the moment. But even more, from a policy point of view, it means that we should be putting college education within reach of more middle-class families. Something I've been working on by cutting student loan interest rates, making scholarships available, actually $16,000 of upfront scholarship for students who want to prepare to be teachers of math, science, and foreign languages. We should be working to create jobs in innovative industries, and I'll say more about that. But it would include such things as making tax credits available for, over the long term, for investment in research and development. It means strengthening Medicare and Social Security. Those are important for the future of our country. It's hard to find a 30-year-old who thinks that Social Security will be there for them. And most of them say, well, that's okay because I won't need it. My preparation for my non-wage earning years will be sufficient. Of course, most of the 90% of Americans, retired Americans, who depend on Social Security for most of their livelihood, probably thought when they were 30 years old that they wouldn't need it. These really do have to do with the future. And of course, protecting the environment so that we leave for the next generation the clean air and clean water that, if it's missing, is an enormous economic drag as well as a diminishment of the quality of life. We shouldn't feel pessimistic about this country. We are the longest lasting constitutional democracy in the world. Our civil liberties, our civil rights, our dedication to freedom, and the actual equality of opportunity found here, while imperfect, are better than you'll find anywhere else. Economically, everybody is wringing their hands, but we are still a wealthy country, the most powerful economy in the world by far, and still the leading still the leading manufacturing power in the world. Stop most people on the street and they'll say, oh, it's China, right? No, it's the United States. But we're slipping. And that is, I guess, what people find so troubling. Government spending in research has fallen by 10% over the last couple of years. Well, it depends on your view of government whether you think that's a good idea or not. But let's talk about why we should care. A recent study of 30 major corporations found that about $50 billion with a B per year of economic activity of those 30 major corporations is derived from government-funded research. NASA, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and so forth. $50 billion a year. Now, as we know from Bell Labs down the road and other places, there certainly has been big payback from private sector investment in research. But right now, we have seen over the last 40 years government funding of research falling by about half. And if you measure it as a percentage of the GDP. Economists will argue about how much of the current economic growth, anemic as it is, or even going back 10 years, when actually you have to go back about 12 years, so before the previous, you go back 2 presidential administrations, to when it was robust. So either now when it's anemic or back when it's robust, and ask how much of that economic growth is due to research-based activity. And so the economists will argue about whether it's 40% or 60%. They will argue about whether the yield on investment in research is 40% or 100%. But whatever it is, it's huge. And we're not doing it. The innovation in America is difficult to define. It is something that has characterized life and economy in America over the years. And however you define it, people feel that we don't quite have it the way we used to. Using some definitions of innovative firms and comparing those innovative firms with other firms, you find that they have about 2.5 times as much growth in employee compensation per employee. So if we want to bring prosperity to the middle class, we should be looking for companies like these innovative companies. One definition is that, or one characteristic, maybe not a definition, is that they tend to have roughly 10% of their revenue each year derived from new goods and services. Now, not every company can do that. Not every grocery store or cleaners or insurance company or trucking firm can do that. But some companies can, but because of inertia or sometimes because of policy impediments, don't. So there are things that we can do, I think, to encourage that kind of investment in the future, that kind of innovation. An interesting fact that I came across, and by the way, some of what I'm talking about I derived from a new book just out in the last month by Robert Atkinson called Innovation Economics. This was reviewed in the New York Times over the weekend, or there was an article about it. And it's a fairly academic study of this idea of innovation. But there are a number of interesting things in there, including the fact that the lifespan of U.S. companies that in a century ago was about 60 years. In other words, if you looked at the Standard & Poor's 500 leading companies, they would last typically 60 years. Now the average lifespan is about 20 years. And in Japan and Europe, it's about 12 and a half years. It is a very dynamic business world. And there's some decisions we can make that will encourage or discourage this kind of dynamic innovation. Not that we're trying to drive companies into extinction quickly, but we're trying to have these companies avoid stasis, avoid becoming stale. In other words, keep up with the world competitively. It's not a matter of picking winners and losers, as is often the criticism goes. It is not a choice between government and no government policy. It is a matter of being smart. Can we find ways to drive innovation? Does the corporate tax system just raise revenues, or does it drive innovation, provide a fertile environment for research and development? To give you a sense that it's not just picking winners and losers. And by the way, picking winners and losers is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of risky because we're not always wise. I don't mean we government, I mean America. You know, the GM bailout now looks pretty smart. It was not very popular around the country. It was only done because it was an emergency. It was going under. A lot of people didn't want to do it, but were willing to do it just because circumstances were so dire. But look at other things that we have done as a government to help. Take Google. Now, Google is, you know, regarded as a success of private enterprise, and of course it is. But where did Google start? Google started with a grant from a $4 million pot of money in the National Science Foundation to look at digital library research. And there were two guys at Stanford who applied by the name of Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Larry Page? Larry Page, isn't it? Yes. Who applied for that grant and got a few $100,000 from the National Science Foundation. Yes, your taxpayer dollars. We have fairly complex and systematic challenges. I think it does make sense if we, through tax policy and other things, encourage work that will maybe lead to less costly health care, that will lead to sustainable energy, that will deal with the expense and deadliness of climate change. We have to recognize that in these innovations, the we can't expect each company to do it all on their own, because not all of the rewards, not all of the benefits come to that one company. It takes a rare company like Apple that put a huge amount of their own money into innovation, even recognizing that other people were going to steal. So there's an enormous industry in building tablets around the world. And Apple would have liked to have kept that for itself. But they realized that they could keep enough for themselves if they were fast-moving and innovative. Not many companies are willing to do that. It is this fear of not being able to recapture all of your investment that deters a lot. Some companies have trouble getting the capital to do it. And there are things that the government can do to help with that. You know, the FHA home mortgage loans, or to give you another example, the innovation that occurred about 50 years ago in nursing homes. Remember, nursing homes used to be where you'd find the biggest house in town and put all the old folks there. No standards about care, no standards about structure or facilities. The FHA said, we will guarantee the mortgage of a private developer who wants to build a nursing home that meets these standards for staffing, for facilities, and so forth. And it brought nursing homes out of the dark ages. It actually didn't cost the government anything. The government made money on that because there was a prepayment penalty when you wanted to pay off your mortgage. The companies worked. And the point is, this is something that was a policy decision to drive innovation in a sector of our economy. This happened to be nursing homes at that time. So, the United States investment in research has grown about 3% overall. This is over the last 7 or 8 years, almost a decade. In the same period in Korea, it's grown 58%. In Hungary, 90%. In China, 187%, compared with 3%. There are things we should do to drive that. We can't just say the market will take care of it, because it clearly has not. Unless you think that that rate of investment in research in the United States is adequate. I'm willing to sit down with you and argue about why that is not adequate. Why other countries are eating our lunch, if we let them. I'm pleased to have had a chance to eat your lunch today. I'm delighted to be there, to be here with you. I think there are many things that we can do together to keep this country as strong as it has been traditionally. But it requires proactive action. And I'd be delighted to talk with you about how we do that and how this relates to our geopolitical imperatives. Why diversion in Iraq cost us gains in economic competitiveness, and on and on. But this is among the things that I deal with as as the representative of the people of the 12th Congressional District, and I would be pleased to have your input on any of these subjects. Thanks very much. Okay.
So we will leave it open to any questions. Or
Thank you. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, and the bell will. Do you have a starting bell or a finishing bell, or just a starting?
I have a finishing bell.
We'll move right along. Okay. Do you want to select the troublemakers,
yeah,
or
Ron? Ron. You have a question?
No, this is 4 minutes.
Oh, go ahead, Dick.
Could you tell us your position on changing the term of the congressman from 2 years to either 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, I serve in the House of Representatives, and it is nothing if not representative. And what keeps it representative, what keeps it the House of the people, unlike the Senate, is this close touch with the people. And there's nothing that keeps me closer than having to stand for approval every 2 years. Which of course means all the time. It's harder that way, but it is part of the genius that came out of Philadelphia 2 centuries ago.
Question?
Okay?
Yeah. Dodd-Frank was an incredible compromise, and you sponsored, co-sponsored HR 2827, which to my mind kind of guts it. And I'm really interested.
Remind me, 2827, oh, this is...
HR 2827.
I don't know by number, I'm sorry.
Dodd-Frank gave protection to a lot of economic protection to a lot of different, in a lot of different ways. One of them was stating that, or legislating that people who advise towns, counties, governmental entities have to meet certain standards. And this bill, of which you were a co-sponsor, removed the vast majority of those standards that people advising towns and governmental entities for money had to meet. And I don't understand what possible logic there was in that, and it's antithetical to my perception of you.
Yeah. You know, I'll start with the premise that we have not gotten into our economic predicament now because of too much regulation in the financial industry. It indeed was too little. But that particular bill, I don't agree with your characterization that it guts. It changes really one provision of that, and the idea was to make financial advice more available to organizations, which would include what you described, the municipalities and so forth. It's to make financial advice available. I'll be happy to talk with you about it more, and I'd be interested to hear more about your objections to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, a lot of the, you're talking about alternative energy,
Yeah.
you know, like solar, wind. The expense is phenomenal with this. And in order to get into that, as opposed to going more toward natural gas and nuclear energy, as we have it, will require a lot of sacrifice. And how do you balance one against the other? Because you know, right now we're not in good shape economically, and it's going to take a lot of money to move into these fields, and you don't know whether they're going to work or not.
Well, a kind of a long answer. I would like to give a long answer, but let me briefly summarize it. The sustainable energies are not, in fact, more expensive. If you look at the true cost of our addiction to fossil fuels in health, in foreign entanglements, foreign trade and balance of trade, and the change of our climate, and I, have to look at the evidence and say that we're changing.
Natural gas.
We're changing. Well, but natural gas is slightly better than oil. It's not enormously better than oil. It is somewhat better than oil. Given the choice using oil or natural gas, I'll take natural gas. But given the choice of using natural gas or fuels that we can move toward, that we can sustain over the lifetime of your grandchildren and beyond, I'll take those. And that's what we should be moving toward. And it is not more expensive. I mean, we've gotten to the point now, because of the investment in wind, you can now install wind power that produces electricity at a rate that's comparable to even coal. And it is, not in every situation, but we should be doing it off the Jersey Shore. We could supply most of our electricity in New Jersey from wind off the shore of New Jersey. And it would be competitive in cost. And furthermore, the rest of the world is moving there. And we would be wise to be in a position to sell it to them rather than to buy it from them, this technology. One more, or is that it?
Yeah, I have a question, Russ.
Okay. Yes.
More of a question looking at the situation from far rather than minimizing it into any one particular issue. And that is, for the last 40 years, congressmen and senators and presidents, Republican, Democratic alike, have talked about the need for innovation and R&D. Atkinson, in his book that you just mentioned, and I haven't read the book, but I read the New York Times review of it last week. Some of the recommendations he makes, in fact, one of the recommendations he makes is to increase the credit provided to research facilities from 20 to 40% for research done. Everything that congressmen and senators have said for 40 years indicates that they all sincerely believe that we've got to put a lot more money into innovation and R&D. But they don't. That's part of the frustration of the American people today. We know what's right. We know what needs to be done. Why isn't it being done? I don't care about your party affiliation. It's been 40 years. We know that. Bell Labs do that. I worked with Western Electric and Bell Labs, and I approved loads of research products. And I remember a time when we went through a bad recession, not as bad as this one, but pretty bad, only about 15, 20 years ago. And I remember AT&T saying, no matter how much we cut budgets across the country, and in those days they owned all the operating companies, we do not touch Bell Labs' budget. We do not touch research and development. It continues to grow, even in the worst recession. Why aren't we doing that as a country? Why have we been cutting back?
There is almost no other industry that is doing what Bell Labs did then. Bell Labs had a dedicated funding stream that's hard to duplicate. But on the federal level, yes, there are a lot of there's a lot of verbiage, a lot of rhetoric on this. But in fact, the policies, the funding, the programs haven't followed. We are still investing in research. We are still benefiting enormously from research that was done, government funding. I mentioned the $500 billion a year number that we've done in the past. But if you look at, well, this much discussed Ryan budget, which candidate Romney has embraced, more or less, it would actually cut federally funded research by $100 billion. So that is, it's not true that all sides are just going ahead and, equally supporting it. The R&D tax credit that you talk about could easily be 40%. I would like to see it at that. I also have legislation that would give a tax credit to people who invest in research-intensive industries. So not only would the industry and their corporate taxes get a tax credit, but investors in that industry would get a tax credit. There are things we can do proactively to make this happen.
Just so I clearly understand, we're talking about basic research and not production research. The reason I ask that is because, going back to that earlier question about green...
broadly as research and development. So it's not just...
But here's the problem I have, going back to that previous question about green energy, here's the problem I have. We have the ability to produce wind energy, we have the ability to produce solar panels and solar energy. We're doing it right here in New Brunswick and in Hunterdon County, for that matter, in large areas. The problem is all those solar panels are coming here from China. We can't produce them at even twice the price. So if we're producing green energy, but we're pouring money into China to produce it, are we really making any progress in R&D here?
Well, wind energy, for example, could be entirely produced here. We actually have had to import some previously from Spain, some from Denmark previously. We're doing a lot better here now. Just to finish on the R&D tax credit, the problem there is this R&D tax credit has existed for years, but it's only been renewed year by year. It's never been made permanent, so that a company can make a long-term decision about what is a long-term process, research. Why? Well, part of the reason is politicians like to dangle that out there in front of people and say, well, if only you'll support me, I'll see that we make this permanent. And of course, by keeping it temporary, they can always do that. That is a recognition of the cynicism that so many people feel. We can do it. I would argue we must do it. And we have a grand tradition here in the United States to build on. If only we would seize it.
We had to move over. So
we want the banner.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Of course.
Earlier this afternoon, when we first sat down, he tried, for those of you who are in Rotary, he actually tried to recite one of the four-way tests. And he referred to it as, you do build friendships and goodwill. Yes, we say goodwill and friendships, but it's good enough.
Okay.
But there are three other parts.
Well, I know, and if only we would follow those in Congress.
It's always interesting to me that the approval rating of Congress as a whole, for the last several years, has been in the toilet. And yet the approval rating of every congressman is very high.
Well, and the approval rating of Rotary is high, too.
So, to make sure that you learn the four-way test, you remember it, you use it on your everyday life, we're going to give you a mug with the four-way test on it.
Great.
Use that every time you drink coffee or tea or anything else.
Thank you.
Take from us. Thank you very much. We normally end our Rotary Club meetings with a reading of the four-way test, and I forgot to do that today. So if you would all stand up and repeat after me. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Beneficial to all concerned.
Have a great week.